What was life in Dark Age Britain really like and more? Boring history for sleep. Dark Age Britain is a subject that's fascinated me since I was a child. This was the period of British history between the departure of the Romans and the start of the Viking Age in the 8th century. It has been romanticized by writers like Bernard Cornwell in his Saxon Chronicle series of novels. And thanks to TV shows like The Last Kingdom, people are even more interested in this time now than ever before. But how much of it is fact and how much of it fiction? In today's video, I want to take a look at what life would have been like in Dark Age Britain and find out if there really were female warriors like those depicted in the TV show The Last Kingdom. So let's get into it. It's thought that around 400 AD, the Roman legions left Britain, and with them they took all the conveniences that Roman rule had brought to the island, including roads, running water, and sanitation. With their departure, Dark Age Britain began. This was a time when the old gods of the Celts were replaced by the new monotheistic religion of Christianity. A new culture started to form. Anglo-Saxons arrived and pushed back the old Britons to the west and north. As the centuries passed, these different cultures mixed together to form something unique, which would eventually become known as England. The Anglo-Saxons who settled in Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries came from various Germanic tribes who hailed from what is today Denmark, northern Germany, and the Netherlands. They probably didn't come over on little boats like the Vikings would do later, but instead migrated with their cattle across a land bridge that connected Britain with Europe. Back then, the North Sea wasn't as wide as it is today. At some point, perhaps after a big storm, the bridge would have disappeared and the only way for people to travel between the two land masses would have been by boat. When the Anglo-Saxons first arrived in Britain, they would have been familiar with farming and raising livestock, as well as fighting with weapons like the axe, sword, and shield. They would have lived in small settlements near the coast or along river valleys. Life in Dark Age Britain wouldn't have been easy. There would have been times of plenty, yes, but also times when food was scarce. Warfare would have been commonplace. People would have needed to be prepared to defend their homes not just from rival Germanic tribes, but also from the Scots, the Irish, and the Welsh. During these times of conflict, men, women, and children would have been forced to flee their homes and seek refuge in the large forests that covered much of Britain. These were dangerous times to be alive. Disease and pestilence ran rampant through the population, and an early death was a common occurrence. In fact, it's thought that only 1 in 10 babies born in this era would live beyond the age of 40, and the average lifespan was somewhere between 35 and 45 years old. If you were a woman living in Dark Age Britain, your life probably revolved around your family and your household. You would have looked after the children, tended the animals, gathered fruit and vegetables, and made clothes. If you were married, you would also be responsible for making sure the house was kept clean and that food was cooked for your husband and any guests. Men were expected to protect their families and provide for them both physically and emotionally. If you were a man in Dark Age Britain, you would have hunted and fished to put food on the table, tended the fields, raised livestock, and fought in wars when necessary. You would have done all of this under the watchful eye of your fellow community members and the leaders of your village or settlement. Back then, everything you did reflected not just on you, but on your family and the community you lived in. Houses back then would have been simple affairs made of wood or stone. They would have been one room with a thatched roof. Furniture would have been sparse, with most people eating and sleeping on the floor. Food would have consisted of whatever was available, such as meat from animals that had been hunted or raised, fruits and vegetables that grew locally, and fish from the nearby rivers and seas. Of course, Dark Age Britain was very different from modern-day Britain. There were no cars, no electricity, and no plumbing. People relied on wells and streams for water, and waste was simply discarded outside. The Anglo-Saxon invaders would have brought with them their own language, customs, and traditions. They would have worshipped different gods than the Britons, and their way of life would have been very different. While the Anglo-Saxons were pagan, the Britons followed a form of Christianity. These two cultures would have clashed, but also influenced each other. Over time, this would lead to the formation of a new culture, one that would become known as Old English. This language would evolve into the English we speak today. Throughout this period, Britain was not a peaceful place. There was constant warfare between the Anglo-Saxons, the Scots, the Irish, and the Welsh. During these battles, men fought with swords and shields, while women and children tended to stay in the background, looking after the wounded and gathering up the dead. But all of this changed with the arrival of the Vikings. The Vikings were a Scandinavian people who lived in what is today Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. They were fierce warriors who raided, traded, and explored across Europe and beyond. They attacked monasteries and villages, stealing whatever they could find. They were a threat that could not be ignored, so communities had to prepare for their arrival. This meant building bigger and stronger houses and other structures to protect people and their belongings. It also meant having a plan in place for when the Vikings came. Men, women, and children would have had to flee to safer areas or hide in the tops of buildings. Some might have tried to fight back, but often this was not enough. The Vikings were too strong and too determined. For many people living in Dark Age Britain, life was tough. The climate was cold and wet, food was hard to come by, and danger seemed to be lurking around every corner. But despite all this, people managed to survive. They built strong communities and supported each other through the good times and the bad. They developed new technologies and ways of living, and they created a society that would eventually become the foundation for modern-day England. One of the most popular theories about Dark Age Britain is that there were female warriors who fought alongside men in battle. This is based on a passage from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that tells the story of Queen Boudica. She was the wife of Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni tribe. When her husband died, she took over the kingdom and led her people in a rebellion against Roman rule. According to the Chronicle, she raised an army of 30,000 men and 200 elephants and marched on Rome. She sacked the city of Camulodunum and killed its governor. However, the rebellion was eventually crushed by the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus. There have been many stories of female warriors throughout history, but they are often shrouded in myth and legend. In the case of Boudica, we have little evidence to go on apart from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle entry. However, historians believe that she may have indeed been a real person. If she did exist, it's likely that she was a powerful queen who ruled over her people with strength and determination. The fact that she led an army into battle shows that she was a brave and skilled warrior. It's possible that she was inspired to rebel against the Romans after seeing the way that her husband had been treated after his death. The Iceni tribe had been loyal allies of the Romans, but when Prasutagus died, his widow and his daughter were ignored and his kingdom was seized by the Romans. This would have been a great insult to the tribe, and it is understandable that Boudica would want to take revenge. Whether or not Boudica really existed, the story of her rebellion has captured the imagination of many people over the centuries. It's a story of courage, determination, and revenge. And it's a reminder of the strength that women have always possessed. Another popular theory about Dark Age Britain is that there were giants roaming the land. This theory is based on a passage from the Historia Brittonum, a book written in the 9th century that tells the story of a giant called Gog-Magog. According to the book, Gog-Magog was a giant who lived in a cave in the hills of Snowdonia. He was so tall that he could reach the top of the trees, and he was so strong that he could carry a house on his shoulders. One day, he went down to the village of Caerleon and stole a pig from a farmer. When the farmer's son, named Bran, went to retrieve the pig, Gog-Magog challenged him to a wrestling match. Bran accepted the challenge and the two grappled. In the end, Bran was victorious and he slew the giant. While the story of Gog-Magog is clearly a myth, it's possible that there may have been some truth to it. There have been many reports of giants throughout history, and there is evidence to suggest that they may have existed. In fact, there have been several giant skeletons that have been found in Britain that date back to the Dark Ages. Of course, just because a skeleton is unusually tall doesn't mean that it's proof of a giant. There are many people who are above average height, and it is possible that these skeletons simply belong to them. Nevertheless, the discovery of these skeletons does add some credence to the story of Gog-Magog. Whether or not giants roamed the hills of Dark Age Britain, the story of Gog-Magog serves as a reminder of the power of myth and legend. Stories like this one have been passed down through generations, and they continue to capture the imagination of people today. So what was life really like in Dark Age Britain? Well, it wasn't easy, that's for sure. But it was also full of adventure, excitement, and opportunity. The Dark Ages were a time of great change and upheaval, but they were also a time when the foundations of modern-day England were laid. If you want to know more about this fascinating period of history, I highly recommend that you check out the books and TV shows that I mentioned at the start of this video. You won't be disappointed. And as always, thank you for watching.